stream every morning at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning, John Cash, Chicago Tribune columnist, not Pulitzer Prize winner.
Once again.
No,
I don't
shunned.
think it'll happen for me.
Yeah, it probably has something to do with the angle of your content, not the quality of it, the angle.
Angle of incidence?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Right.
We're coming to you live from FJ Kerrigan Plumbing here in Wilmette, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. And before we get to our next guest, just wanted to touch on the Notre Dame Cathedral burning yesterday, of course, and some good stories coming out of tragedy, as is often the case. And one of them is this hero priest, Father Fournier, who ran into the cathedral to save Christ's crown of thrones and some of the other artifacts in the cathedral. Yeah. So that's one thing. You also had the wealthiest man in France has already publicly committed $200 million to rebuild the cathedral. So there is a rallying around this iconic cathedral and against the backdrop of Easter Sunday this Sunday.
I think that's very important because fire or no, the fact that that Christianity is is being burned as we speak all over the world. In Africa, in Europe, here in this country, where it's shunned, attack upon the church and upon the faith and the faithful.
Well, speaking of doing a bit of a torch job, for a little bit of a tortured segue there, but the state of Illinois, we're burning it down economically. We're doing it all by ourselves. We mentioned the other day, 51st out of 50, according to Wallet Hub, in terms of friendliness to taxpayer. We're behind the District of Columbia as well. We would have been 56th out of 50, but Wallet Hub didn't include the other 5 U.S. territories. Our friends...
When I heard that, that floored me.
Well, I mean...
That's how bad it is.
But it's great, isn't it?
To reach the bottom, to reach the nadir of everything.
Nadir. Nice
like
word.
Ralph Nader.
Yeah.
IR.
IR. Yeah. Here's the thing. What are we getting for the money? That's always my question, because I know we love the taxation here, and we'll have the
Please, sir, may
graduated
I have
state
another?
income. Yeah, we'll have graduated state income tax.
Right.
Get rid of those pesky exchanges in the city. Take all the insurance and legal business with you. That's fine. I'm all for that.
Right.
It's just, what are we getting for the spend?
Well, you're getting if you want to walk with your loved one downtown Chicago on a summer night.
Oh yeah, you have that
beautiful beating, maybe.
Well, you have that Navy Pier flyover by my place, which
nice.
It's nice.
Yeah,
it's nice. It's a nice amenity.
Listen to the police scanners.
Well, but also worst services in the country for persons with developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
Some of the worst school systems in the country, including one of the second biggest, third biggest in Chicago.
I tell you that I'm proud of my sons. One of the boys is student teaching. He wants to be a special ed teacher.
Good, that's great.
A coach of soccer. And
that's not a sport,
yes,
but you can still coach at calisthenics.
But
you need coaches, instructors.
There are openings in Chicago right now, in the city of Chicago, public schools for special ed teachers. And Betty, who is a teacher as well, advises him not to apply there because of the way that it's done. The class sizes are so big and there's so little support, and people are burning out left and right in that system.
So I'm again still trying to find out.
So what do you get for
what are we getting for the money?
If your parent and your child needs special services, can you stay in Chicago?
I know a lot of people who've left the state, including in well-to-do suburban areas, that left the state because they had a family member with a developmental disability, a child,
right.
And other states just do a better job of keeping their promises in terms of service provision. I have a friend of mine, family from Riverwoods, moved to Wisconsin specifically for that reason. I know that's anecdotal, but it points to a larger reality. What about infrastructure, our comparative advantage in the regional and global economy? Our location on the lake with rail and waterways and
We're the
air
hub.
transportation.
Water and we're situated to have a renaissance, but you don't have a renaissance when you're debating for the next 20 years how quickly do we go bankrupt, which is what it's going to happen.
Highest black unemployment in a major urban center. That's Chicago. Talk to the operating engineers about the state of our state's infrastructure. So what are we getting? Here's what we're getting, as you know. We're getting a lot of public sector workers who are making 30, 40, 50% more than their private sector counterparts and have guaranteed seven-figure pensions to kick.
It's a payoff for Democratic political workers to perpetuate the power held by Mike Madigan, Johnny Cullerton, and other White Walkers or whatever they're called.
And also to fold in a lot of
White Walkers.
And also to fold in a lot of Republicans too.
Oh, wait, the Republicans that caved on the tax giveaway, the tax increase under Rauner, those Republicans from Arlington Heights and the rest of that crew are beneath contempt. Beneath contempt, not even. I'll mention Bill Barr just to make fun of him, or William. What is his name? The HBO person.
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher.
Bill Barr is the Attorney General.
Yeah, Bill Maher, I meant, but not those people.
Mm-hmm.
They are beneath contempt to me.
So that's a perfect segue, on top of a segue, to our next guest. He's Jonathan Williams. He's the chief economist and vice president of the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC, they put out this annual report along with our friends Steve Moore and Art Laffer, Rich States, Poor States. In which category do you think Illinois is, despite having all of these well-to-do areas like the community we're sitting in this morning, Wilmette? To get the answer, Jonathan Williams joins us now. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, absolutely, and good morning, and greetings from the land of make-believe here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, from one woozy dreamland to the other.
We're in Mordor, Illinois.
Well,
yeah.
Boy.
So, how bad is it? How bad is
Illinois?
Well,
it's, you're not number 57 of President Obama's 57 states, but you're close to it, and you're at 48 this year in economic outlook. And this is something we've done for the last dozen years with Art Laffer and Stephen Moore, of course, selection to the Federal Reserve Board under President Trump, and look at how states compete across the board on taxes, on regulation, labor policy. And this is, disturbing. This is Illinois' worst ranking in the history of our report. You've hit it a couple of other times, but you've fallen 8 spots since just 4 or 5 years ago, the start of the Rauner administration, when you started to see some positive ideas being talked about, at least. And so, this is not a new story, I know, to both of you, but it is yet another piece to say, yes, we confirm the Wallet Hub story. We confirm so many of the other stories that are all coming together to say, Illinois has a massive competitiveness problem. And from what I see as an outsider, I was there in Springfield, unfortunately, when the $15 hour minimum wage, which is going to decimate, especially downstate, I think, and then, this discussion over a millionaire's tax would be the death knell to Illinois' economic competitiveness.
Go through the methodology a bit. I mean, you cover a range of quality of life metrics to come up with your rankings, and just give us a sense of the approach.
So we go through and measure 15 different things, and you can obviously probably choose 500 different things to compare states, but Art Laffer has come up with this methodology used it for the last 50 years when it comes to things that we know matter for economic growth: taxes, regulation, labor policy, things like tax burdens, tax rates, right to work status, which most of your neighboring states have now accomplished because of its economic development benefit. Minimum wage is a factor that we take a look at in terms of affordability of a workforce, workers' compensation costs, and things like tax and expenditure limits. So we try to get a well-rounded view. So while you see some of these surveys are specifically looking at business taxes or tax burdens, we have a little bit more holistic approach. And the other thing that's nice but our ranking is all of our factors were chosen as things that state lawmakers in Springfield and other state capitals across the country have direct control over. Because you see all these other surveys, sometimes they'll say, well, what about the weather? Or what about X, Y, or Z factor that legislators would love to control sometimes? Our factors are actually directly controlled by state policymakers.
And what are the states that are at the top of your economic outlook ranking doing? States including our neighbor to the east, Indiana, and states where a lot of Chicago area families are moving, Tennessee and Florida, all in the top 10.
Yes, Indiana's been a great success story, as you've seen over the last 7 to 8 years, especially starting with Mitch Daniels and then Mike Pence as governors. They've moved up to number 5 from being in the mid-20s just 6 or 7 years ago. So it's really been an incredible approach for them of chipping down tax rates. Instead of having every year being a new budget crisis and thinking about new ways to raise revenue, they've been thinking exactly the opposite of how do we get our rates down to become more competitive, both on a corporate and on a personal income tax side. They've also done some innovative things to help control property tax growth at the local level, which I know is a huge issue, especially suburban Chicago area there in Illinois. And, you look at places like Tennessee, as you mentioned, or Florida or other huge inbound migration states. Florida's going to gain about 1 million people on net over the last decade, and looking to gain probably 2 U.S. House seats after the 2020 census because of that in-migration when we do the reapportionment process following the 2020 census. And, of course, the thing that Tennessee and Florida have in common is no personal income tax. We actually think that is one of the best factors that states can put together, obviously, to make themselves more competitive, not just for individuals, but so many people forget that small businesses, the vast majority of them, who are the big job creators of new net jobs in states, pay on the individual side of the code. So that's why we think that's such an important factor.
But here's the problem with all these big spending, big government-loving people moving to Florida, right, after they've had their way with Illinois. They go to Florida. Then they'll change the politics of Florida or Indiana, where, say, I would like to live under the with a case of Urban under the windmills in Rensselaer and look back at Chicago and laugh. But I don't want to bring all my liberal Democratic friends with me to basically destroy the politics of Indiana. And I'm wondering what will happen to Texas and Florida as all these people come and demanding their new place to be converted like the old.
Well, that's really one of the biggest questions I get as I travel to 50 states and talk about our research. Is they look at the Ted Cruz results of only winning by a couple of percentage points against Beto this last cycle, and they look at Florida and they look at some of those other states. And while we don't look at it from a political angle, I can tell you, working directly with state lawmakers who are looking at this issue pretty closely, I think there's 2 ways you can look at it. One is, that is one distinct possibility that people will bring their desires for more public services. I live in Northern Virginia. We've seen it firsthand in terms of the federal government workforce come in and populate Northern Virginia and what that's done to the economics of the Northern Virginia area, and certainly the political outlook as Virginia has become a bluish tinge of purple, if you will. But then there's the other aspect of this, which is, that's why it's incumbent upon all of us who follow this closely, and certainly elected officials, to help tell the story of why individuals were underemployed or unemployed in a place like Illinois or my former home state of Michigan at one point, or New York or California, or these high-tax states, and why they have opportunity in states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and Indiana, states that have gotten it right. And I think to some degree it's also incumbent on the business community to stand up for themselves and not to be shy in talking about why is it that we just created these jobs in this state versus our former home state that has driven us out with high taxes and regulatory state. I think this is a huge issue in that the business community at large, especially big businesses and C Corps, are too afraid to talk about these type of issues with their employees. That's got to change, I think, if we're going to have that understanding with the rank and file employees across the country.
Why?
I think they're afraid of retribution. A lot of times there's been this axis of of bad policy, if you will, between big government and big business, where you look at a lot of big businesses looking for handouts instead of just an overall free market, low tax regulatory environment. And they're afraid that some of those favors are going to get called back in if they are too vocal in criticizing some government in the state that has given them that special favoritism. We call it cronyism or tax preferences, or a lot of different things, but I think that's the root of the issue.
All the worst states are kleptocracies, and that's what Illinois is. It's rent-seeking, right, of course. But there's two data points on the Illinois profile that I think are really interesting and I think would surprise people. And I talk about it all the time. In point of fact, Illinois, we talk about public sector employees. Illinois has one of the lowest numbers of state employees per capita in the nation. And here on your chart, you point out public employees per 10,000 population, we're ninth. Debt service as a share of tax revenue, 49th. So in point of fact, the public sector unions in this state way outpunch their weight. There's a perception that they have all this power and so people cater to them. In point of fact, what we really have is a relatively small percentage of the population that are, rapaciously going through other people's money, as we talked about at the outset, with the salary points and the guaranteed pension benefits and healthcare benefits associated. And that's so much of the dead weight that Illinois is carrying.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think, you point out a very interesting piece there, and that you don't normally see a state with that relatively small percentage of public employees as a percentage of the population have that type of a debt burden, and certainly the type of pension straitjacket that Illinois finds itself in with your Supreme Court rulings and whatnot. And, this has got huge effects where I think elected officials are absolutely looking and thinking that they cannot do anything on public sector union reforms or they'll be voted out of office. But you're right. I think they absolutely are punching way above their weight when it comes to the overall numbers.
He is Jonathan Williams. He's the chief economist and VP for ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Check out the latest iteration of their annual report, Rich States, Poor States, at ALEC's website. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back. Take care.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.